Hello and welcome to John and James. My name's John Hastings, and here's my co-host in his new green background,
What do you think?
James CeeLo. I like it.
What?
Very, very suave, as you are, sir. Very suave. So, James, today, AI. We're back on the AI train. Are we early or are we late?
I think we're just on of that wave, aren't we?
crest-
It's just
crest of a
starting
wave?
to.
This is like the
We
early
are.
days of the internet. Is it going to be bigger than the internet? Is it the early days of social media? You know, when you just knew it was there. People were talking about it, but you didn't really pay that much attention to it. And it sort of just drifted into everybody's lives. A slow creep. And then now people can't put down their phones, can they? It's like complete addiction. And maybe AI is going to be that slow creep. So today we'll talk about how AI will transform the health industry. The health industry, I think, James, is going to be one of the biggest ones to be impacted. I know with companies like DeepMind and AlphaFold and the speed of change in that area, then if we start from where human health is now, James, it's changed over the last 70 years. Would you like to give us a little bit of an overview of human health, why it's changing, what's happening to the landscape at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's incredible amounts of research that's coming out. I mean, a lot of it done in mice studies, and certainly around longevity and health span. That a lot is coming out of the US, seemingly, but Europe as well. But the majority appears to be happening in the US, where they're doing a lot of studies, around epigenetics, and, as I said, mouse studies. And there's many different ways in which we can improve our health outcomes that we didn't necessarily know about before. We kind of had an idea, but now it's come out with research that's really solidified the assumptions that we had previously. I mean, things that we were doing for millennia that actually was beneficial now is being scientifically proven that it is a good thing to do. So, for example, calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, or fasting mimetic type sort of diets where you're reducing your calorie intake has been proven to have all sorts of downstream beneficial effects. It's pretty easy to do if you can get your head around it, if you can actually figure that you don't have to eat in the quantities and the regularity that we've been brought up eating. But now there's protocols, there's drugs being introduced that can change you on a genetic level that will mimic those types of processes, the things that we have innately at our disposal anyway. Pharmaceuticals are coming up with a way in which you can take a pill and get the same results without the hardship. So it's interesting how we've kind of gone through these sort of cycles of behaviors that you can do naturally, but now you can have those effects created, as I said, by taking a pill.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of research, and again, like I've said previously, that the research has mainly been done on animal studies, but it's just starting to sort of translate through to human application, that we can see that the way in which mouse studies have been created, obviously doing it all on mice, it's a lot easier to do. The speed in which mice age, you can get all of that data very quickly because of, the age. I think for every sort of 20 years is like a year in human aging. So everything's accelerated in terms of the outcomes. So it's fascinating the way that science is now proving things that have always been there, but now it's just got great data around it and good research.
Yeah. And the AI team at AlphaFold and DeepMind, they the founders are English Londoners. So we give a
Oh,
shout out to the American brothers and sisters, but we're still representing here in England.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, good point. Good
but they
point.
are doing some, fascinating work there. And I think just in terms of the landscape over the last 150 years with, antibiotics and things like penicillin and sanitation probably had a huge effect on, human health and well-being. But we did reach a point sort of post World War II where we've sort of had an abundance of food, but then a changing of the food system, haven't we? And a tech has maybe caused a bit more of a sedentary lifestyle. So a mixture of the two with the onset of potential high sugar, high saturated trans fat sort of foods. Maybe people are more, I think obesity is a huge problem. Diabetes, heart disease from our food system, from our sedentary lifestyles. And I guess we're not really focusing on the prevention side as much. There are gyms around and things like that, but they don't seem to shift the systemic tide. So we've moved towards cure, haven't we, in terms of trying to find out what can we do in terms of like Ozempics or trying to decode the proteins in the body. We're sort of attacking it from the cure based side and the genetic based side and medicine based side instead of really looking at the fundamentals. What do you think about that, James? Because people's health, there is longevity. People are being kept alive longer because of medicine and health and antibiotics and early detection, which is fantastic. But like you've said before, there's a difference between lifespan and health span, isn't there?
Yeah, it's the quality of life. If you're living longer, it's kind of pointless if you haven't got quality of life.
Yeah.
But just thinking back to like the 80s, that there was this whole thing around fat, saturated fat, low fat foods, that everything was, demonized, that fat was demonized, that
margarine came in, didn't it? The whole Marge thing. Yeah, it was.
And that was out of, that was out of research and heart health. And they thought, well, if we take the fat out of food, but replace it with artificial, sweeteners to change the taste of it, to make it palatable, but then that had downstream effects as well. So they took one thing out and replaced it with something else that then caused problems.
Yeah.
And then people thought, well, if it's low fat, then I can eat twice as much without having the same effects. So, it's interesting how the food industry responds to research that's out there. But I'd like to think now that as we progress, that the research is being taken more broadly, and we'll get onto it, but AI and the way in which the internet has impacted these studies, that now it can be more fact checked. And we don't just take things as read, because the government come out and say that these are the initiatives, putting additives into bread, fluoride into water.
Yeah.
That a lot of this stuff that was there sort of 70s, 80s, possibly even earlier, can actually be properly researched and stress tested. So it's interesting where these are going to go, but like models can be tested now with AI. We can sort of do a lot of research in the ether that doesn't necessarily have to happen in, human studies or animal studies, that all of the data can be put into a model and out comes a result that, never touched a sentient being, but will give you a very good idea as to what, the impacts would be. So it's fascinating where it's going. It's absolutely incredible.
It is. I think in broad terms, I guess we've got the prevention side where you've got early detection. So AI is going to help in terms of decoding our genome and things like what AlphaFold are doing. So they'll be able to see a bigger picture just much more quickly. then all of a sudden you can cut a hell of a lot of costs in terms of your research and your time between, coming to market with products.
Yeah.
That's going to massively help. So that's going to accelerate things forwards. In terms of the business models around health, how do you see that, James? Because there's a little bit of a contradiction, isn't there? Because if you solve a problem, you sort of get rid of your business. So how does that gonna play out? Which is kind of a problem that we're gonna have to face in all areas, aren't we, James? Where when it gets down to being able to solve real problems, you displace business models, don't you? Whereas it is lucrative to have a management model that sort of never ends. It is probably more lucrative to have somebody that you manage with ill health for a long, long period of time rather than completely cure
Curing
them.
them.
So how do you
Yeah,
square that circle?
it's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it, when you think about the business model and the health model. And then you've got the sort of the macroeconomics of it, that people that have the money can afford to pay for certain treatments that lower economic brackets can't. What's going to be available to who? Is it going to be a postcode lottery that if you live in a particular area, you're going to get access to these types of treatments? So, and will it widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots? The healthier or the richer you are, the healthier you're going to be. And the poorer you are, the more unhealthy you're going to be. And it's an education piece. I mean, already seeing it now that low-income families aren't necessarily, buying the right kind of foods. They're going for foods that are sort of sustainable, but aren't necessarily nutrient dense and, healthy options. So, and there's a little bit of a kind of misnomer in terms of how much, healthy food costs. You can buy healthy for low cost. Depends on whether you're buying sort of junk food. There's lots of different ways in which you can kind of sort that out. But it is interesting in terms of the model, as you said, because we kind of don't want people to get healthier, and certainly pharmaceutical companies are existent on finding ways or medications to supply for high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. And, you think of how many people are on statins, for example, and the efficacy of a statin. And I think I was reading something today of sort of a 19% efficacy for patients taking statins that then wouldn't suffer from the potential stroke or, the outcomes of high blood pressure. Seems a little bit low to me, 19%. That doesn't seem particularly effective.
Yeah.
But they're, prescribed because it's seen to be a low risk medication to take to sort of head that potentially off at the pass. But, at the end of the day, there's so much that we can do for our health that doesn't need that level of intervention. Medication certainly has it serves its purpose, but there isn't always a case to be made for its necessity. But
maybe that will improve, James, because you've got to think, if they're not having to invest as much time and money into the development of the drugs, then there's probably not as much of an incentive to make that same amount of money back, I guess, in my sort of altruistic viewpoint of solving problems. So I guess there's going to be maybe a middle ground, because if you've spent 10 years and spent 100 billion on trying to develop something, then it's in your interest to try and recoup that, isn't it? Really,
completely. And I think it's predicated on human nature as well. It's like there's always going to be a faction of people that want to take a pill.
Yeah.
There just will be. But that comes down to a belief system as to whether you think that you can change the outcomes of what's going on, or you feel compelled to, well, my GP's told me I've got to take this medication. I trust my GP and their judgment, so I better well bloody take it.
Yeah.
So, there's always going to be a market immaterial of what happens, generally. But I do believe, though, with the likes of AI and like we said right at the beginning, we're on this kind of upsurge of AI. There's still a lot of people that aren't using ChatGPT, that aren't aware of the power of AI, what it can do, how it can educate, that they will still be reliant on the kind of traditional model of being told what's good for them, as opposed to doing their own research.
Yeah.
So, we were talking earlier about, PTs, for example, that they're not needed to design programs anymore. It was always back in the day, that was our expertise. We design a program specific to the individual. Whereas now you can go into ChatGPT, you can put all your parameters in, you can put your goals in, say, this is my weight at the moment, this is my my eating habits. So it will design a nutritional program for you, design a program for you, and you've not had to speak to a PT first or last. But it's very, very much based on the criteria that you put in, and will, surf the net. It will disseminate every program that's ever been put out on the internet. And it will give you the very best of all of those based on the criteria you put in there. So that is an example of how things will change even more so, that it just takes the human element out of it, that people can design their own programs and are not reliant on anybody else to intervene.
Yeah, they can be so much more real time and bespoke. Let's say you've got, I know, your kid's dinner party coming up. You've got one vegan, one who can't eat gluten, and you've got all these different things going on. And you say, right, I need a shopping list and some recipes for this amount of calories, and it will just
within seconds it'll pump it out.
And then all of a sudden it will be, it will be linked to your shopping cart. Yeah. And it will turn up the next day or the same day or whatever. So it's going to be so bespoke, real time. That's where the value is, isn't it? To stop the nuisance of having to type things in. It's things like MyFitnessPal, which are obviously brilliant. You can take pictures of the barcodes on the back of foods, you can track your calories, but it's still a nuisance doing it. You sort of want to make it even easier, don't you? And I guess that's the direction with everything. If you just think through the lens of somebody making less effort and saving time, and then you increase like the dream outcome, don't you? And how certain you are of getting that. I think you just got to look at every service through that lens. And then you just want to be hyper personalized. It's going to be so hyper bespoke, isn't it? It's not going to be a cookie cutter. I know with ChatGPT now, James, I said to you before, now it's logged all of my history of hundreds of prompts. And now it's built a picture around my interests, who I am, what I'm thinking, what I'm researching. And I've just asked it to summarize that. And it's just incredible, really.
So based on that, it could know you better than you know yourself. Or it's like, how do you kind of perceive, or how are you perceived? That's a really interesting one.
So Scott says agentic AI will really help with this and start to have AI tracking actions. I totally agree. Yeah, I was just reading about the agentic side, the AGI side, and this is going to be the next level of these things taking new actions without you having to ask it to do it. So it will automatically go and do your shopping, organize the pickup. It will look at your diary. They know if you're at home or not. It will be so interconnected, James. And I think that's where that side is going to go. So in terms of the health and the nutrition side, and the diagnostic side, we know that we're trying to prevent things from happening. Like with, the Peter Diamond, is it Diamandis?
Diamantis.
Yeah, he's doing a lot with preventative work, isn't he? Full blood body work.
The whole thing. And it is preventative, as you said. It's, rather than trying to kind of figure it out when you've got it. I mean, a lot of medicine, unfortunately, our sort of system, the NHS, is set up to deal with the after the fact. It's not about preventative. A lot of what we have now is all about, well, you're symptomatic. How do we now treat you, as opposed to how do we prevent that from happening in the first place? And that's got to be so. I mean, just it's so much common sense.
Yeah.
Think of the cost saving as well if you can actually prevent something from happening in the first place. And so much of what we got going on is, related to obesity and just poor health generally, is all of these markers that can be shown up. It's like, well, this is your trajectory, John. If in 10 years' time you keep going the way you're going, this is what your life is going to look like. And if you can have that in a very, really kind of, it's surprising how, I think, reactive you'd be to being shown something like that. But it's believing that is, because you think, oh, it's 10 years away, or that's not going to happen. But like, if you could have a model that shows you, it's like, keep going this way, and this is what your future looks like in terms of disability, in terms of the medication you're going to be on. You're not going to be doing this anymore. That's for sure.
Yeah, good example of that, James, is recently, isn't it, with my health. I've been a health professional for over 20 years. I'm used to, telling people, explaining to them the preventative health, drink water, eat right, do all this stuff. And I've recently come down with a kidney stone, and that is high oxalate diet, high in spinach, almonds, dark chocolate, things that you would, assume are healthy in moderation. If you go over the top with those type of foods and you're dehydrated, which I know myself, I'm not drinking enough water. You get into bad habits, don't you? Life takes over. But I didn't know until I started getting the symptoms, and it was already too late.
It's already there. It's already there.
So for your average Joe who doesn't know anything about their health, but then again, going to the NHS, you go to the doctors, and I love the NHS, but they didn't give me any information on really what it was, what causes it, what's happening, how to prevent it,
what to do about it. Yeah.
So I knew more than the GP, because I've obviously knew about that type of stuff and researched it myself, but there wasn't any pathway. So for the average person, they could just be doubling down, doing the things to make it potentially worse. And can you imagine how this compounds to the effects of just an overrun NHS of people that don't really know what they're doing? So these diagnostic tools, James, how can they help us with like the fitness trackers? I don't know really what would have helped me. What would have helped me in that situation on a tracking?
Well, if you'd have, because obviously, I mean, like an Apple Watch, for example, you can set it up there to prompt you to drink.
So the prompts, drinking prompts,
yeah. So you can set that up to make sure that you are, drinking fluids. So there is that, but then you're gonna think, well, it's this weird sort of inefficiency in the body that you're only sort of prompted to drink when you're already thirsty, and then it can be too late. And you think, well, the body's such an incredible design. Why is that the case? Is it environmental? Is it that we are being distracted so much that we're not actually thinking about what our bodies are telling us? So, ordinarily, if you were sat by the campfire, you'd just had something to eat or whatever, or, you were building something, whatever, you'd be distracted. But actually, if your body was going, you should drink now, that all these mechanisms are there for a purpose.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of fine line between obviously being overhydrated, which is not good because that then depletes you of electrolytes, and you know, you can get into difficulties then, to being dehydrated, which will cause problems. So there's this equilibrium all the time, these kind of things kicking in, these little signals that are going off to tell you to do stuff. You feel hungry, eat. You know, the ghrelin kicks in, eat. Feel thirsty, drink.
I think
Then people say we get confused
primitive
between what
way, James. I would say I completely agree with that. I would just say eating patterns are probably unnatural. So you then have to drink to try and flush out the toxins from these foods. When would you ever have dark chocolate on tap every day? When would you ever have, you know, an influx of almonds or you know, a volume of certain foods readily available? You probably wouldn't eat spinach every day. It's an excess.
No.
So you probably wouldn't need to drink, I guess, as much if you wasn't putting as much food through your system.
Yeah.
So I think it is an excess of certain toxins and foods, even healthy foods. You can OD on vitamin C and all sorts of things, can't you?
So, you know, the device that you wear will tell you how hydrated you are. It'll give you a prompt and say, look, you know, based on the feedback that we have from your skin, you know, skin temperature, it'll take all these kind of diagnostics to say, you need to go drink. You're dehydrated.
Just sort of an idea there, James, of like something attached to your toilet. So it basically, when you pee into the bowl, it already gives you like it analyzes it, and then on top of the thing, it gives you a feedback straight away.
Yeah, and it will analyze your poo as well to make sure if there's any blood in that it's not, you know, potentially cancerous.
Yeah,
there's already smart toilets that will do that.
Yeah, that's the $1 billion idea. Smart diagnostic toilets. That would be cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think they already exist, mate. I don't know that that's going to be something that we could market. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I've never been in a smart toilet before, have you? Even in rich people's houses.
Well, there's ones that wash your ass and do different things, but
yeah, not one that give you like a imagine you go for dinner at someone's house and you get a
it gives you a full colonic.
You give a full medical.
Yeah. Come back to the table afterward and say, yeah, I'm good. I've had a clean bill of health.
I'm all good. But those type of diagnostics are great. But what's the flip side of them, James? Because we talked about this before. We saw an article, didn't we, about people that can then get, you know, overly anxious about constant monitoring, and then all of a sudden there's a sweet spot, isn't there, of people feel, you know, kind of depressed or anxious if they're not hitting their sleep markers, if they're not hitting step markers, and then it can create this weird obsession. What do we think about that flip side? How do we mitigate that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And awareness is always the key to any of this, isn't it? I think it's that, you know, like we are on our phones, constantly sort of checking for notifications, whatever. But if you find yourself getting into that pattern of having to check it every morning, then it's like, well, where's that coming from? What's that all about? But there seems to be these kind of phases that people go through of having these devices and, oh, it's all exciting that I can check the data, and you think it's going to change your life. And it all comes down to the individual, doesn't it? How they interact with it. Because some people, they can go, yeah, actually, that's just telling me what I already know, or that's really useful. Depends if you're sort of data driven. Some people, we know people are very much into their data, that they're not, you know, they're not basing decisions on emotion. It's all about, well, what's the data telling me? So great for those types of individuals. But like some other people, maybe not so great. So it's hard to kind of generalize and say, actually, this is the kind of the way in which you deal with it. You've got to kind of figure that out for yourself. But it's interesting that you can become addicted to the results and then impacted if the results aren't a kind of a nice linear A to B sort of line of progress. And certain nights, like sleep tracking, for example, you might not get as much deep sleep. I mean, I checked mine this morning, to be honest, and I'd had about 30 minutes deep sleep. And I'm kind of shooting for about 50 to an hour, 50 to 60 minutes, ideally. Some nights I'll get like 15. And I think, is that really true? So it's interesting. And then I start to go, well, you know, what was I doing last night that I didn't get that good quality deep sleep, that good restorative sleep? So you can then start to sort of tie yourself up in knots and, you know, really disappear into the data. And that then starts to give you a little bit of anxiety. But sometimes I check it, sometimes I don't check it. Periodically, if I think about it, I'll do it, but I'm not tied to the data. But yeah, that article was about the Aura ring, and I think the battery had died on it, and they weren't able to then check because of that. So it was like this pattern interrupt, and it was then that they suddenly realized, wow, I'm really quite addicted to the data.
It was like a bit of a relief, like she was saying, wasn't she,
Yeah.
from the actual worry about it.
Yeah. And that,
Which
but
is a
you know, the
catch-22, isn't
flip
it?
side
Because
is they can improve routines. They can improve, you know, your awareness of what you're doing because, you know, the data is telling you. So it's a double-edged sword.
sometimes I think, James, that we're trying to mitigate things when people are in a cage. You know, we're like trying to put tech onto monkeys in cages where you've read things like the blue zones with, you know, the highest percentage of people live to 100 and beyond, and none of them go to a gym, none of them are massively on tablets or medicines, none of them are wearing fitness trackers. Yeah, they're living in a different time and you've got to adapt to your environment, but you know, is that a shout for, we need to be, the biggest thing we can do with AI is to liberate ourselves from the type of environments that people are living in? Would you say maybe automating housing and food might be the best thing that humanity could do for human health, potentially?
Well, it's interesting. They're predicting now that, you know, within the next 10, 15 years, there's potential that we could reach this sort of longevity escape velocity that for every year that you live, you get more than a year back.
Yeah.
So they would argue potentially that, okay, the people in the blue zones are centenarians, so sort of living to 100, that the prediction now is that we're sort of to 150, so getting another 50 years of life with these kind of protocols. So, and wearable tech is forming part of that narrative that actually, you know, the blue zone people, they're not going to the gym, they're not wearing tech, they're not invested in that as much as, you know, the next generation. But they would argue that actually another 50 years of life is based on very much going into the tech, very much going into the data and how to optimize human health. That's environment, that's, you know, socioeconomic, obviously diet, exercise, community, connectiveness.
Yeah.
All of those elements need to kind of be optimized and obviously genetics play a big part.
Like you said, their community is a bigger element than one would think. Wouldn't you say, James? There's all sort of science on people who are married or have got partners. You know, when one dies, people go downhill a lot quicker. When you're part of a community, increases your lifespan. So there's all different benefits from that connectedness. So it's thinking, how could we utilize AI from a first principles fundamental level to liberate people and create more of those things that
Mm.
improve, holistic well-being, James, instead of doing it from I would say it's sort of when you're doing something that's not good, but you're forcing yourself against an environment and you're still tracking it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great, but the environment is hard to push against, would you say, James?
Yeah, it can be. It can be. But I think a lot of this is like people going, well, okay, I kind of know the principles, but I'm not really sure. How do I apply it to myself? So the thing with AI now, as we said before, is you can create a program for yourself. You can put all of your parameters in. You can say, well, what your goals are, where you're currently at, and it'll pump out a program for you based on all of that research. So it will scour the internet, all of the research documents that have been published, and within minutes, if not seconds, it'll pump out a program very much tailored to you of how you
Yeah.
can then implement that into your life. And it will fit in with your lifestyle because you can put all of those details in. So, right, I get up at this time of the morning, then I'll, go and clean my teeth. I'll have this for breakfast. Then I'll go and take the dog for a walk. I'll do this, and this. So an entire outline of the day. And it will say, okay, well, if you want to live to 150, this is what you'll need to do based on those parameters, that information that you've just given me.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, we'll just follow that blueprint.
It'll be very interesting because we've talked about it before about adherence to data. It will be interesting to see, because of the data and the sort of feedback loops will be so good and personalized. Will that be as good as another human doing that? Because like we've said before, if it's just a computer and you don't show up,
there's no
maybe you
accountability.
don't really care as much. But maybe there are incentives then built into the system, like the Chinese is it the societal scorecard thing, the points where you do good and you get extra points on something. I know people hate that, don't they, with the it's like a Black Mirror
that can
episode.
be addictive. Yeah, that can be addictive. I mean, all of this comes down to whether people do actually want to live longer. I mean, it's like we can take it from our personal perspectives. It's like I would quite like to live for another 70 years, given the right circumstances, given, being in good health, connected, having my family around me. If any of that changes, then the desire is gone. So it doesn't matter what's out there, what medical advances and tools that we've got at our disposal. If the desire isn't there, it's all meaningless.
It's true. That's a good point.
So,
I remember when my nan died, my granddad I don't think he cared really that much anymore if he was died. They've been together for 70 years.
You just welcome the end. I mean, it's at that sort of stage, you just go.
Some people have had enough, haven't they?
Yeah. And we can all sort of, pontificate and say, well, this is a fantastic thing. The advances, where health is going, where tracking is going, we're living longer, healthier lives, all that sort of thing. But the desire isn't there. It's all pretty pointless. And I think there's this sweet spot is going to be desire with the development in tech. If we can get that right, that the desire is there to live longer or to engage in the tech, then that's utopia. But
I think that's a great point, actually. I never even thought about that. People, it's like you have a lot of affluent people who say they definitely want to live longer. Obviously, they might be living very good lives. For your average Joe, where life is, a struggle to pay the bills and do stuff, you're really leaning on your human connections, aren't you? And yeah, if you've got kids, there's always seems to be someone around, isn't there? I guess you got kids, you got grandkids, so. But I never thought really about that feeling of being disconnected and not really wanting to live longer.
That's a very, very real thing for people.
Yeah,
so
there's
no engagement. It's like, why would I want to prolong the suffering?
Yeah.
if that's your life, if that is your reality, why would you? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, especially if you somehow outlive your kids and stuff. That's you don't. No one really wants to do that, do they? To be honest, that's
No,
not a
no,
that's not a
that is
good
not.
vibe.
No.
Any other ethical things around this? I know it's not really like the dignitas stuff with euthanasia is something to do with that type of topic, isn't it? Whether people can choose then to opt out, how that's going to, be affected by AI. I'm not really too sure. In
Yeah.
terms of, I guess if there's people are living longer and the Western world are having less children, then all of a sudden we're going to have a real imbalance within our society, aren't we? We're going to have a hell of a lot of old people. As I know in some places in China, they're out sort of baby nappies are selling less than adult nappies. So
That's a real contrast, isn't it? When you think
yeah. Now, I suppose with a one-child policy potentially having an impact slightly longer term, but at that point, I guess maybe people will have their own robots at home. The robots will come into more social care. I know social care is slightly harder to mimic because it's a lot of soft skills, but is that where we're going to go, James? Is it going to be the robotics tied in with the AI and into some sort of humanoid form? I've seen a lot of robot dogs out there. I've got a neighbor at Prosper Robotics working on home robots that will be for rent, and they'll like do your hoovering, make you a cup of tea, apparently do the washing up. So probably the home robot sector is going to be huge for elderly people because there's a lot of loneliness. Loneliness seems to be a huge area where people are struggling, James, isn't it? And I think potentially AI is going to be more impactful than you could even imagine. I've been using it as a bit of a self therapist, talking to it. And to be honest, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed by its answers. And you can talk to it as in, use your voice notes.
Yeah.
And it brings something back. As soon as it brings like a voice note back as well, I think that's going to be.
I think we're only within a generation of that being normalized.
Yeah.
They'll get to a point, it's like, God, people used to go and see human therapists. How weird is that when you've got one in your pocket whenever you need it 24/7?
Expensive
you can have that
well,
interaction,
isn't it, James?
Well, this is it. I mean, some people
who can afford therapy, like to pay hundreds of pounds a month. To do it.
And the system, unfortunately, it's just not geared up for mental health. There's waiting lists. Again, you say, if you can afford to pay for it, then that's one thing. But there's huge overwhelm in the system that is just not geared up to deal with it. So if there is a way in which you can get a meaningful result, and that's the kind of the caveat that actually, if it does make an impact, it's not just convenience that facility is there, that it does actually make a difference, and you can see that people are benefiting from it, and suicide rates going down, or people reporting less about mental health as a result, then that can only be a good thing. But
there is some papers out there, James. There are some
research
papers I've seen that are indicating that is the factor.
The case.
Empathy levels are shown to be, there's a big disparity between empathy levels from a human and a robot. Obviously, this robot is not going to narcissistically talk about itself. It's going to give you all the empathy in the world, isn't it? It's a complete change. And there are, I did read some data on a report about that. With the creation of GLP-1, you're on the road to cure obesity and type 2 diabetes. Yeah, the whole Ozempic stuff on there, Scott, it's a big area. What do we think about that, James? Because we've talked about the Ozempic stuff before. I know AI can probably, improve these medicines, and they can be more personalized towards you.
Mm.
There are side effects, aren't there, James? It's not all.
There can be some gastric discomfort, but as soon as it takes the form of a pill, I can see this just going stratospheric at the moment. I think it's like a kind of an administered click injection type thing. So it's not like sort of having taken a syringe and inject it that way. But I think for a lot of people that can be a barrier. But as soon as it takes the form of a pill, I think it goes off the chart. But interestingly, and it's a limited experience, so by no means exhaustive, but the people that I know that are on it tend to be male. So guys are taking it, which is interesting. But a test subject of maybe 4 or 5 people that I know that are taking it are men.
I'll look at the data on there and see who's taking it. Maybe guys are more risk takers on that, so they're willing to test certain drugs a little bit more potentially. I'm not sure on that one. I guess women are more, I would say, aesthetically worried about how they look, so I would assume
possibly
that
risk averse.
That would be a thing for the women. But like you said, obviously it's an appetite suppressant, but if people are eating junk and they're malnourished, what does it mean when you're just eating less junk? You're still going to be malnourished, aren't you?
Well, so that it doesn't change I say it doesn't change, but there seems to be less
value
of a change in the quality of what you're eating or attitude towards the quality of the food you're eating. So it's interesting, and you will have had a similar kind of interaction, I think, with people that when they're exercising, they tend to make better choices with food because of the effort that's going into doing the exercise. They actually start to make better choices and have got better quality food going in because they know how bloody hard it is to burn off a few calories. So when they're looking at like a Mars bar and how many calories are in that, going, "Oh shit, I didn't get anywhere near that on the treadmill today," burning that off. So I'm not going to put that back in my body. Whereas with Ozempic,
I saw a little bit of a difference on that, James. You see that point you just made there with people exercising. Early adopters of exercise, I found unless you go quite slowly as a PT, I found that you increase their appetite. So they might be good for 4 days, but day 5 they're starving because they've increased their output in terms of exercise. And then all of a sudden you find binges creep in. So it is a difficult one.
It's a tricky one because there's emotional triggers in that as well. So there's,
and you're more hungry, aren't you, when you're exercising?
But sometimes yes, sometimes no. Again, I found both, and it comes down to the individual. So I haven't got any hard evidence around it, but there's certain people that were just like, well, I'm actually eating less.
Yeah.
And then others that, again, it's difficult to do an exhaustive study to say the reasons why, because, it could have been an emotional trigger, like I said, or, they kind of got to the weekend and thought, well, I've done a week's worth of exercise, so I can now, binge.
I'll be interested to know what Scott thinks about the GLP ones. What do you think, Scott? Do you think this is the way forwards? I know it's better than obesity and diabetes, but can you imagine giving your kids, these type of drugs, your overweight kids? Is this, or is it just a plaster on the problem and we're just dealing with the symptoms with these type of drugs? Do we need to think more holistically? I'll be very interested to see what you think on that one, Scott.
Well, it's almost the antidote, isn't it, to food additives that have been put there to make food more addictive. You want to eat more of it. So kind of these drugs seem to be trying to counteract that the brain is telling you need more of this particular substance. And then the drugs are sort of making you feel like you don't need to eat as much.
Paveen's talking about the importance to take meds with diabetes. Exercise and food intake are the most important. I followed Jason Fung. Healthy fats such as almond and avocado. Interesting. Yeah. Just drink fluids, because almond and avocado.
Go easy on the almonds.
It's high oxalates. Yeah. Anything high oxalates with dehydration is a potential kidney stone. So go very easy on those type of things. But again, James, we're talking about symptoms, aren't we? Are we a part of this AI thing is going to be addressing systemic symptoms of poor health? My hope is that we start to address fundamental systemic problems, which then mitigate having to get to the point where you having to deal with symptoms. But for things like childhood cancer, genetic cancers that humans get, there seems to be a huge amount of people I watched on the BBC getting cancer under the age of 50 since 1990. They don't quite know why. Could be a multitude of things. Could be toxins in the environment, plastics in the environment, chemicals, deodorants, face washes, sprays. It could be, even they were saying, fluorescent light. Just being in an office environment where you've got this artificial light beaming down on you. Obviously, it's radiating through your skin. So they're thinking maybe it could be something to do with something as innocuous as that. Because we're not really meant to be in that environment, are we, James? And if you think of it in a primitive way, we're not meant to live in a cave, and we're not meant to stand under artificial light all day. So we should be outside, shouldn't we, on that one?
Yeah.
Fluids don't fill you up. There are so many apps to control your food and remind you to eat. Cancer is directly connected to trauma. I think there probably is some, there probably in some cases where there is diseases that can be connected to your psychology.
Trauma.
Whether that's changing the way you eat, or or you're just pure in cortisol levels are super high.
Yeah, I think it's that.
Something on the outside.
Yeah, I think that's the fatty acid release through bad stress, cortisol, adrenal fatigue.
Changes your body, doesn't it? Adrenal fatigue, you start losing hair, you don't eat properly, it's those high cortisol, especially if you don't release it through any sort of exercise, and it's just all internalized trauma. So I guess that's a good point from Praveen. We didn't really cover that. I think that
I agree.
The psychology side, the sort of mind-body connection, this is something where AI is going to come in and be that type of coach, support, I guess. And I guess it doesn't have to be a replacement for humans. It could be encouraging you to connect with more humans. It could be getting rid of automating things that keep us inside so we can go out and socialize more, experience, be outside, do more healthy things.
So what do you think it's going to do for the brain then, John? So you've got the hippocampus, which is there for kind of long-term or short-term, long-term memory, the amygdala for our emotional intelligence and to process those kind of things. So if we then are delegating different tasks to AI, that the creativity is less, the processing of the brain is abdicated to an AI, whatever form that takes. What do you think the impact is going to be on the brain? Yes, it will kind of free us up to do other things, but that sort of processing, those synaptual connections that were there to think about all these sort of things. What's your opinion on how that's going to change the brain chemistry?
I think you're definitely going to get a change, aren't you? You're probably seeing it already with children who can do text messaging and things. There was a girl on a station recently when I went into London at London Euston who wanted to use my phone to do something, to call her parents or something like that. I gave her the phone, and I'd never seen somebody type so quickly. I was just like in amazement. Her fun was just unbelievable. And I see it with my daughter as well, that type of speed. But you give them a pen, it's probably a completely different thing, isn't it? So we're going to be working different parts of the brain. And I guess like what's happened to our bodies in the last 70 years, you're going to have a reaction, aren't you? We've got the obesity of the body and the diabetes. You're probably going to have a lowering of certain parts of the brain. But then again, like people who like play computer games and things like that, you'll be surprised. There's studies out there with surgeons that play computer games, how much more efficient they are in surgery, because they've got the dexterity. Very, it's extreme volume of moving your fingers and looking at a screen, making very minute adjustments. So if you've been playing a computer game that's addictive for 5 hours a day for a few years, inevitably your brain signals and your hands are going to have this. You're going to be a superhuman, aren't you? So I guess if you create sort of gamification, if you do more things that you enjoy, I would say my level of, with AI and online, I would say my level of creativity and curiosity has gone up, because I'm constantly looking to feed that thirst of understanding. I'm constantly on Wikipedia. I'm constantly trying to understand stuff. Whereas before, you'd have to go to a library, then you have to drive there, walk there, then you have to go and wait for the person to go and get you the book. Then you're going to have to search through the book. It's a laborious process, isn't it, James? Well, now you find out instantly, but now you want to know the next thing. I want to know the next thing.
My fascination is like if there could be a really good game, quite an addictive game, but built into the game, there's these safeguards or caveats that after a certain time. So like, for example, you can play it for like 3/4 of an hour, and then 15 minutes, you've got to go and do some exercise. And the game will then test or get the feedback from a smartwatch or something like that to make sure that your heart rate went up above resting for a prolonged period of time, that proves you actually went out and did some exercise, and then it will let you back into the game. So there's things that are actually built in there to promote activity, that you had to get up and walk around, and it will detect the fact that you've got up and walk around. That can be, built into the game, that you've actually got to march on the spot for 5 minutes or do something, and then it will enable you to start playing again. Anything that can be built into the games that will promote that, I
makes
think
it fun, doesn't it? You got to think of ways to incentivize, just really doubling down on human psychology, whether that's competition, or that's just the people getting certificates or winning awards. There's lots there, isn't there, to really incentivize people. Paveen says she's not keen on gamification for so many reasons. And John, I'm a jobless librarian currently. Go to the library. I go to the library close to me. Actually, it is an amazing building. But there's definitely a time and a place for the library. Gamification have you used gamification with learning, James, or anything that you've done? I don't know.
It's like I tried Duolingo, the language app.
Oh yeah,
and that's quite gamified. So what else have I done? I mean, things like Strava, for example. It's not gamified necessarily, but you're kind of allowing people to give you kudos and they can comment, and it's little dopamine hits that have been integrated into
Yeah.
apps. And fitness apps
Peloton,
are
I don't know
finding
if
they're having to gamify.
Peloton's got the whole
Well, you've got,
interconnectedness or real-time races and
and
stuff
you've
like
got
that. Yeah.
the ladders as well. You've got you can either create a team or compete.
Yeah.
So there's that competitive element, which is another good one, depending on the individual, if they are of a competitive nature. I would argue the majority of people, actually, if they really kind of dug deep, that they would be a little bit competitive. So anything that can kind of tap into that, I think it's a good thing, that competitive nature.
Yeah, I think so, James. Yeah, there's a lot out there. I think AI is going to come through in that sector. What's the other one, James? The virtual reality, augmented reality. I guess that's going to come through. Gamifications,
Yeah.
gyms. Once you can genetically engineer humans, will they need to go to the gym as much? If you're just, if you're a guy and you're genetically enhanced and you're built like a gorilla naturally and you don't need to pump weights, then will you go? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's going to change, isn't it? But
yeah, I mean, interesting. My eldest son had some VR goggles and was playing sort of like this. It was kind of like a laser thing where you chop the blocks up to music. It was like beat box or beat something. Beat Saber.
Yeah,
I think it was called. And he would be on it for about an hour and a half. But because of the physical nature of it, he's burning calories. He was getting sweaty. It was just like, but he would, and then he'd send me videos of him doing it and stuff like that. It was like he lost about 1.5 stones just doing that.
That's good.
So that you can kind of understand. I mean, you don't know what it's doing kind of visually and the disturbance, but at the end of the day, he was so engaged with it and got so competitive with it that, yeah, it did it for him. And actually, it got him to a level where he felt that he could go out for a run then, because his cardiovascular fitness had gone up, that he didn't feel so out of breath, and he started running after that. So, going back to his MPEG, that at the end of the day, if it can lead on to, if it can give you that impetus, if it allows you to move forward, I'm not thinking long term here, but if it's a way in which you can just start that process moving in the right direction, there's a good element to it.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely changing. It's going to change fast, isn't it, in the next 10, 20 years. So whether it is for people that are more affluent first, who are going to get first dibs on everything, that's normally how it will go. But then again, these things do filter down.
Yeah,
and
I think it fundamentally is health on our terms. It's like designer health. So, for example, if you want to fast for a couple of days, take this pill.
Yeah,
and it takes the pain. The brain doesn't sort of go through the existential angst of not eating for a couple of days. You take the pill on maybe you want to do it over a weekend, or sort of from Monday morning. You take the pill on the Sunday evening, and then you have no compunction to eat until Wednesday, and you've done your 72 hours, 48 hours. And that's it, you're done, and then move on. But you've had none of the discomfort, none of the mental anguish. It's a means to an end, and you've got all the downstream benefits of it.
Yeah,
that I can see coming.
And that's what we'll say with companies. Just think, how can you make things easier for people? How can you decrease the effort for people? Because that's really what people want. People may say, look, the challenge is good, they need the challenge, but that's just not the trajectory.
It's human nature. It's human nature. They just want the results without the effort.
It's like electricity, isn't it? We're looking for the shortest.
Yeah, but generally speaking, if we could get the same result with less effort, you kind of go down the path of least resistance, don't you?
Yeah, and that is doing more with less. That is what tech is, isn't it? I know we can be sentimental about things, especially people in the health and well-being industry. They sort of want to wear the hero's badge of going through, pain
Yeah.
and challenge to overcome their mind. But we've got bigger fish to fry, haven't we? We've got our sun's going to blow up at some point, so we need to figure out how to potentially get off this planet and fly to another galaxy at some point. That's going to be an inevitable. So be less about trying to pump your muscles up and more about innovation.
It puts things into perspective a bit, doesn't it? It's like
space exploration, health, sustainability on this planet. So there's lots of things that will overcome just our ego-based things around aesthetic health. So I don't think we'll worry about that too much. But no, that was good, James. We'll leave it for there. We've been going over an hour already, so we could talk about
an hour and 6 minutes. So that's a hell of a place to end it, isn't it? The sun blowing up. So I guess we'll end it there.
Yeah, we'll leave that one there.
With
but
that mic
thanks,
drop.
guys. Thanks, Paveen. Thank you to Scott as well. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you on the next live. Take care. Bye, James.
See you on Wednesday.